Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. In the first hour, we're going to be spending some time looking at the political campaign. We have in studio with us today Nick Pitts. He serves as the Director of Cultural Engagement for the Denison Forum. Those of you that are longtime listeners of Point of View remember that name, Jim Denison. Yes, he's been on the program with us many times before, and Nick Pitts works there as well. He is a graduate of a university in Tennessee, also a graduate of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and is a PhD candidate at Dallas Baptist University, working in the area of leadership, and has attended both the Democratic at that evangelical meeting with Donald Trump. So we're going to get into some of those issues, and as always, give you a chance to join our conversation. If you can't get in the first hour, because we'll have a lot to say, I have left the second hour intentionally open, although there's a lot in the news today I do want to talk about, but certainly we will get into those opportunities. And if you'd like to join us, of course, the number is 1-800-351-1212. We have a link to the Denison Forum as you go to our website, pointofview.net, and some of these articles by Nick Pitts. So I think you'll find those very helpful. So Nick, welcome to Point of View.
Oh, it is so great to be here with you all.
I am looking forward to hearing from you, because none of us around the roundtable, we used to have a roundtable with Kelly Shackelford, Penna Dexter, myself, none of us were at either the Republican or the Democratic convention. You were at both. So let's start maybe chronologically. You were at the Republican convention, Cleveland. What was that like for you?
It was hot, to say the least. Yeah. And so it was a lot of fun just to be able to be there in Cleveland. And so the city that rocks definitely rocked that past week. And so it was so fascinating, because you saw in the media narrative there was going to be so many protesters.
Yes.
And the response was there was going to be quite a few police officers. And being in Israel, I know that there's a police presence, and I know what a big police presence is there. But in Cleveland, it was almost more so. I mean, it was so interesting just to see the various police officers from around the country to be there to try to keep the peace and enact justice. But protesters didn't show up. It was so fascinating that the media narrative continued to put forward an idea that there were a lot of protesters, but there were almost more journalists that wanted to catch if a protest riot broke out. And so it was so fascinating to be able to see that, and to be able to see how different it was than what was told.
Now, you're a millennial. Was this the first time you've been to a Republican or a Democratic convention?
I am. I'm a selfie-taking, Uber-riding, student debt accumulating millennial. So this was a political nerd's dream, and so I got a chance to go. This was my very first convention.
Yeah. Well, again, I've done those before. Radio Row, I even was a columnist, have been up where the columnists were and things like that. But it's a lot of hoopla, a lot of expense, but I'm not sure much gets really accomplished other than writing a platform. Apart from this, it's just really kind of a show. And it seemed to me that Donald Trump decided to turn it into a show and put all of his kids in front of there, and some people that were maybe high equity value type of guests, but not necessarily as political as some of the conventions have been.
Yeah, it was very interesting. So I think probably the break was in 1960, where we saw the development of the platform. But in 60, I think we saw a transition to really being more entertaining value, and the entertainment, but not only entertainment, but also unifying the party to try to coalesce the party in order to make the final sprint towards the November election. And Donald Trump continued to prove that to be the case, and it was very much an entertaining 4 days. And so we just saw a variety of performers that got forward there.
Yeah, and it's interesting to find out who was not there. You have the governor of the state of Ohio does not show up. You have our senator here in the state of Texas who gave sort of, but not really, an endorsement of Donald Trump and got a lot of boos. So they didn't necessarily come out of there unified, did they?
No. I compared Ted Cruz's act. He was the girl that wore white to the wedding. He kind of took a little little bit of attention away from Mr. Trump. And so I think what you saw, though, is very much a loud populist uprising that really does want Mr. Trump to be their candidate. And what we continue to see is they feed into that as well. And Mr. Trump, for better or for worse, is continuing to lead them and guide them.
Nick Pitt's with us, and again, he's the Director of Cultural Engagement at the Denison Forum. And by the way, if you have not signed up for the daily Denison Forum commentaries, which are done by Jim Denison, as well as some others, and I know you contribute to it as well. These are just priceless. And of course, right now during the Olympics, I've had some great testimonies that I've read and passed on to other individuals. So every day, whatever's in the news. I know in the old days, Jim told me that what he would do is get up early in the morning, look at stuff, and then write it. And I'm thinking, I have deadlines because I write daily commentaries too, but I can't imagine getting up at whatever he did, 4:30, 5 o'clock, and then having it written and out and still showing up in my inbox by 9 o'clock. But he told me now he does it the day before. But nevertheless, it's pretty amazing, and he is a force of nature. And so what a great resource.
Quite is. And so I like to think that we have early morning conversations that might not otherwise happen, as well as late night conversations.
Yeah.
So as the culture continues to change, we'll try to respond in an appropriate manner.
And it's really very well done. So again, that's at the Denison Forum. Let's go then to Philadelphia, the Democratic Forum. Now that Democratic convention, just a little bit different, wasn't it, in many ways?
It was so drastically different than the Republicans. So speaking about the Republican convention, I said that there was a significant police force and an underwhelming sense of protesters. And then you go into the Democratic convention and you didn't hear a lot about the protesters. And the police force didn't feel as though, at least in the areas that I was in, that they were as significant a force. But it was almost the opposite was true. There was so many protesters. Wherever I went in Philadelphia, there was a group protesting, whether that be about anti-TPP measures to Black Lives Matter. There was just so many groups that were protesting. But probably my favorite protesters of all was the alpaca farmers. Yeah. And they came packing. And so they had their alpacas with them. And so wherever they were.
Tennessee, so you've seen this, right?
I being from Tennessee, I just kind of wanted to take off my shoes and enjoy the sight. And so it was a whole lot of fun just to be able to see, again, just that energy at the conventions that I just didn't think about.
My favorite protester is the one that had a sign that says, Donald Trump hates kittens. I mean, really? But nevertheless, again, very different in that sense because they did have the Black Lives Matter wife or the mothers, of the children that were killed, and also tended to be much more political and almost from the get-go decided that they weren't going to talk as much about Hillary Clinton and her accomplishments, although some did, but a whole lot more about how awful Donald Trump is and how this would be a disaster for the nation.
It was so fascinating. Again, just to compare and contrast the two conventions. So typically at a Republican convention, you'll hear themes of American exceptionalism. There'll be God Bless America. There'll be great patriotism at there. But what continued to characterize the Trump convention, it was so interesting, was the strong central figure of Donald Trump,
right,
coalescing around that individual. And so he is the only one that can fix the solutions. That very much is what we would characterize as Democrat, a liberal progressivism. Whereas at the Democratic convention, you continue to hear chants of USA, 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 of believing in America. And that very much has characterized Republican conventions for so long. So it's almost like they switched identities.
Certainly, especially, I said before, even after the speech, and we played lots of clips of what Hillary Clinton said on Thursday night, I was thinking maybe one of Ronald Reagan's speechwriters wrote that because except for the parts, obviously, about abortion, things like that, and women's health and those things, almost everything else had that Reagan-esque George W. Bush kind of feel to it, which was very odd.
Very, very odd because I guess for better or for worse, you saw Mr. Trump, again, to paint a very gloom, a dark kind of picture of America, and he being the one that can lead us back into the light. Whereas at the Democratic one, you just continue to appeal to the hope of what America is and what it can be.
Nick Pitt's with us. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, he has written a number of articles. Trump's evangelical meeting left me with huge questions, as well as a response on the whole question of should Christians support Donald Trump? So we're going to get into that, and you can read the articles, which we have posted on our website, pointofview.net. I'm sure if you go to the Denison Forum, which we also have a link to, you can find them. Nick Pitt's with us in studio. If you'd like to join us, we'll open up the phones a little bit later, but we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
This year, we'll be hearing quite a bit about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, also known as the TPP. It not only will be a part of the presidential campaign, but there's good reason to believe that it will be an important vote that will be taken after the November election. The TPP agreement establishes a Trans-Pacific Partnership Commission that has sweeping regulatory powers. It is charged with overseeing the implementation and operation of the agreement and has the power to amend it or modify it. In fact, the White House calls the TPP a living agreement that can be updated at any time. Curtis Ellis was on my radio program recently. He said that this commission is an international regulatory agency that will be staffed by faceless, unelected bureaucrats tasked with writing rules on immigration, food, energy, medicine, internet, copyright, patents, and business within our borders as well as across our borders. The TPP could be compared to the EU, which originally started out as a coal and steel cooperative, then evolved into the European Common Market, and now is the European Union. Months ago, the president made it clear that the U.S. wasn't interested in the UK if they left the EU because he wanted to negotiate with a big bloc like the EU. The U.S. Trade Representative reinforced those comments by saying that the administration only wanted to build trade platforms like the TPP. As Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton helped to negotiate the TPP, but then renounced it last fall, perhaps to fend off the challenge from Bernie Sanders. Some skeptics believe that it was merely a tactical feint and that she will push TPP through after the election. Donald Trump has consistently been against the TPP. The TPP is a bad trade deal, but that won't stop many in this administration that will push for a critical vote by the end of the year. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Betrayal, slavery, revenge, redemption. Ben-Hur. In theaters August 19th from Paramount Pictures. Rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Great to have in studio with us today Nick Pitts, and he is the Director of Cultural Engagement for the Denison Forum. And we've posted a couple of his articles. I thought we'd work our way through those. And then, of course, this will generate questions and comments, and those are welcome. The program's called Point of View. I'd love to hear your point of view. And the first one I thought we'd work on is Trump's evangelical meeting left me with huge questions, having some fun with the way in which he says the word huge. But I thought it was intriguing that, again, many of our listeners, of course, were not in that meeting, although it's hard to believe because I think you almost had 1,000 in that room. Yeah. And so we've, over time, every time I have a guest in studio that was at that meeting, whether it's Kelly Shackelford or whether it's Jack Graham or whether it's Jim Garlow or whether it's our Eric Metaxas, whoever it might be, we ask of their impressions. So I would love to, especially since you're a millennial, looking at that with a different set of eyes. What were your reflections on that particular meeting?
You know, I think you bring up a great point in the sense that I am a millennial. And so I was one of the few millennials that were in that room. Right. And as Pew Research has done so well, as millennials, there is a great distrust that they have towards the institutions of our day. So, for example, 88% of millennials have a distrustful view of Wall Street. They have an 82% distrustful view of Congress. And so there's just an inherent distrust within them, almost like a cynical side to them. And so there was just that, I'll say it's an inquisitiveness that I came into the meeting with. And so I very much was under the understanding that it was going to be more of a conversation that we could have with him to better understand his positions and issues, and really to try to counteract that narrative that we continued to hear that he's very different in person and by himself than he is on stage. And what was so interesting was I expected others to come into that conversation a little bit more inquisitive, but it was almost like we were at a campaign rally.
Yeah.
There, it was about an hour, 20 minutes of time that really just was talking points, just very much was just playing to some of those continual key points that he always tries to make on the campaign stump trail. And so it was very disheartening, I guess I would say.
Yes. And again, I was born in Berkeley, so I come with a real skeptical mindset as well, distrusting of institutions. But I recognize that that's not necessarily true of the builder generation, those born before the end of World War II, or the boomer generation. And so it's really important sometimes to ask those questions. And one of the things I notice you write about here is the fact that they were sort of predetermined questions. Now, again, I think that Kelly Shackelford, who's normally with us on Fridays, probably would ask very good questions about legal issues. So sometimes a predetermined question is good, but I'd really like to have some, just even from the audience, nailing to the wall about a couple of issues, because we're talking about something that is as important as who the leader of the free world is going to be.
I couldn't agree more. Predetermined questions aren't necessarily a bad thing. I think it really does allows the person to be able to think thoughtfully about the question, because a lot of the issues that we're facing today require a certain level of nuance. What was just so disheartening is we spent time talking about his family and about his personal life, instead of talking about some of the significant issues of better understanding his immigration policy, or better understanding the foreign policy of what are you going to do relative to Boko Haram and ISIS that continue to have plague overseas and continue to come closer and closer towards us and be a greater threat to us. I would have loved to hear more about that instead of his family. I love that he loves his family. I just would have preferred to hear more about his foreign policy.
And then again, the convention sort of did the same thing, trying to humanize him, and so did the Democratic convention try to humanize Hillary Clinton. And I'm glad that they're human beings, but you know what? We go back and look at one of the better presidents of the early part of the 20th century is a guy by the name of Calvin Coolidge. Now, this is a man that sometimes never said more than 2 words. This is a man who rarely talked to people. He probably didn't have very good people skills, but he was a pretty good president. Certainly, Abraham Lincoln is considered one of our best presidents, and I'm talking to a guy that's doing a doctorate in the area of leadership, and he couldn't even possibly do well with focus groups and those kinds of things. So sometimes we have to recognize how a person's character and how they're going to apply that is a whole lot more important than whether or not they have a good family life, which I think is nice, but again, it's just not the necessarily most important question I want answered.
I could not agree more, and there couldn't have been a better illustration than Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge, we know, wasn't a large persona in a room, but Calvin Coolidge faced so many issues of the day that they didn't see the light of day because of his leadership. And I think that speaks greatly to his leadership potential. We think about one of the greatest presidents that was ever in the United States. We think about Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson wasn't someone that was a great orator, but what Thomas Jefferson did is he played to his strength, which was small groups. He played to his strength of small groups and doing those strategic meetings, we might say, but then also his writing. And he was able to write down and opine beautifully what we would have as the Declaration of Independence, playing to your strengths. You don't have to be the greatest orator, but what we would like in a president is to be able to figure out your decision-making skills when you get that 3 a.m. call, and when you're faced with some of those tough decisions that only a president can make, that can't be delegated.
What about Donald Trump's faith? That is an issue that apparently, from what I'm reading, did not show up a great deal, other than Mike Huckabee saying that Trump was God's man to lead our country. And I can see you rolling your eyes on that one, but figuratively so far. But what about that? It seems to me that then you had individuals claiming that he became a Christian, and then some like Jim Dobson backing off from that. But that seems to be an issue that a room full of evangelicals and other religiously oriented people would probably want to know more about.
Yeah, and so I completely agree with the talking point that says we're not electing a theologian in chief, we're not electing a pastor in chief. I completely agree with that. There is no religious test for the office of the president. And so I understand not wanting to address that issue. But again, if we're not going to address the religious issue, that's always a topic of conversation among evangelicals relative to the presidency, I would like to talk about the foreign policy. I would like to talk about his immigration policy that continues to be put forward. I'd love to further understand some of his economic policies that he laid out just yesterday. And so if we're not going to talk about his faith, then let's talk about some of those issues that that are plaguing the minds of individuals and citizens.
A lot of that can be found in the piece that by Nick Pitts on, again, Trump's evangelical meeting left me with huge questions. And I thought, just before we get to our next break, let's get to the other one. This is kind of a response to one article, but I'm going to broaden it because since then, you're obviously responding to one individual, but there have been a number that have been making the case, as you would just, I think, honestly say, that we're not electing a theologian in chief, but a commander in chief. Makes for a great tweet, you said, but again, the tweet sometimes is contradicted by the program format and the words from the speakers. So how do we think this through?
A book that's greatly influenced me that I think was prophetic and before its age would have to be Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. That we have transitioned from an information age to an entertainment age.
Yeah.
That we live in a world of tweets, and we live in a world that we have to be entertained consistently. And so I think that really does detriment for us to be able to think thoughtfully about the issues of our day. And if we can't think, the only way we'll think thoughtfully about them is if we're entertained by them. And I think that's just a disservice.
Yeah, and again, entertainment is kind of one of those things that drive this as well. But again, you raised some other questions. We are certainly being told right now that some of the big issues are religious liberty, certainly the whole issue of right to life, definition of marriage, and then, of course, some of those other topics you just addressed, whether it's the economy, immigration, or the rest. It does seem to me that in order to get your head around supporting Donald Trump, you have to set a fair number of those aside. Do you think?
Mm-hmm. And so I think that is so interesting is what we continue to see with both candidates is that if the past is prologue, as Shakespeare so often quipped, we have to understand, we look to the past to better understand their decision-making skills. And when we see their decision-making skills, we continue to see that what plagued John Kerry. There was the flip-flop. And so for me, I'm just looking for consistency relative to their decision-making skills so that when they get that proverbial 3 a.m. call, I can trust those very skills.
Yeah. And I've said before, I don't mind people flip-flopping if they flop to the right side. If they flop to the pro-life side, I'm all for that. But you do have, after a while, wonder about consistency and character. And more importantly, as I said, in addition to those issues, you have to say, who are the individuals that they would put around them, personnel or policy? And again, I think we do see some differences there. And we're not just talking about the Supreme Court or even the federal courts. We're talking about who's in the bureaucracy and a number of other issues. So I'll tell you what, let's take a break. And when we come back, I'm sure we have started a conversation in your mind. So let's start a conversation on the air. So that number is 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have in studio with us today Nick Pitts. He's, again, the Director of Cultural Engagement at the Denison Forum. And if you'd like to join the conversation, your thoughts about can you bring yourself to vote for Donald Trump, or have you seen enough that you could vote against him? What about Hillary Clinton? We're going to be talking a lot more about her in the second hour because of some of the news stories and those kinds of things. But if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about Nick Pitts, or if you'd like to know more about the Denison Forum, click on his picture there, and we have a link to the website, also information about some of the articles he's written, and you can read those. And I would give you the assignment to read them and then click that share button. Put it on your Facebook page. Start a conversation. Or if you have a blog or maybe you know somebody that would like that, take the time to visit our website and pass those on. Just before we go to a break, as I've been mentioning, the month of August is a time when donations are down. Our best month is December. No surprise there. Our worst month is August. So if you can help us out in August, we would greatly appreciate it. Giving usually drops to the lowest level right now. So go to the website, pointofview.net. Click on that button that says donate and recognize that every gift is important, especially as we try to educate you about the issues as we're doing today with Nick Pitts. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Did you know there's an approved healthcare choice just for Christians that's founded on the timeless principles in God's Word? It's not insurance. It's MediShare. Over 189,000 believers across America who love God and share each other's healthcare bills. It's about half the cost of health insurance, and you never pay for medical practices that go against your Christian beliefs. Best of all, the healthcare law includes a special provision for MediShare members, so you don't have to buy insurance or face penalties. MediShare is affordable healthcare without compromise.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 855-BIBLE-11. Not available in Montana. MediShare, affordable biblical health care. Call 855-BIBLE-11. That's 855-BIBLE-11.
Cast your vote today for Point of View Radio. Please become a monthly partner at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
In studio with us, Nick Pitts, again, Director of Cultural Engagement for the Denison Forum. And if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Let's head to Georgia first on the Good News Network. Heather, thank you for calling today.
Yes, hello. Thank you for taking my call. I really enjoy your programs. I wanted to say that you were making comments about the differences in the conventions.
This was Nick Pitts was at both of those, so he had a chance to compare and contrast. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I watched both of them. The problem is that, of course, there was a lot of different things. There were no flags or anything up on the stage until everyone complained about it. But also, they've changed America to the way that they want it. So, of course, everything is looking up to them. I mean, they brought in all these, Obama has, and that's their party. They brought in all of these things that the rest of us are, look at them as doom and gloom. We want our country back, and that's what I was seeing. And it seems like to me that there were an awful lot of untruth, if I can say that instead of calling them lies.
Sure.
But you know what I mean. It's
well,
like
fact-checking, they had a little bit of fun with the fact-checking, both in the Republican and especially in the Democratic convention speeches.
Especially, yes.
Yeah.
And so it was like they're very good at re-diverting what everyone looks at or hears, and they're especially when they change the words and names of things to make it seem not so bad.
Good point.
I don't know. It just, yes, of course, it seems like it's changed because our country has changed. They're liking what's happening. They want more of it. Abortion on demand, no matter what month it is, and all that. You can't let your children go to. I mean, it's not that you can't. Your children don't want to go to the bathrooms or anything. It's on and on. I mean, I could go on.
Yeah, I think we got the idea. What was kind of interesting, Nick, is that obviously an outgoing president wants to claim that he, or if Hillary Clinton's elected, she is the result of some things. So it's happy days are here again at the end of those conventions. I understand that. And, whether that was Ronald Reagan or whether it was Bill Clinton or whether it was George W. Bush, I understand that. So I guess we shouldn't have been too surprised that the Obama convention, if you will, that was upbeat and wanted to pass the baton on to Hillary Clinton. But there were attempts to try to minimize some very significant issues like the crime rate and things of that nature. And then on the other hand, if you're trying to come in, you look at Barack Obama 2008, it's the worst economy ever, or now Donald Trump, where the crime is terrible. And so some of that is due just to the nature of if you think everything's fine, why do I want to change, versus if you think there are problems, you want to change. But there was a lot more going on than that, don't you think?
Yeah, there are two individuals that I definitely can point to relative to change. So Dr. Cotter wrote a book called Change Theory, and in Change Theory, he says the first step to creating change is to create a sense of urgency.
Right.
And I think very much there was a sense of urgency that was created at both conventions.
Yeah.
Either playing upon the fears of what a Trump presidency could be to the Democrats, and then playing upon the fears of what a Clinton presidency could be.
Yeah.
But as Christians, we know to be true that fear has no role whatsoever in our decision-making process. His perfect love has cast out all fear.
Yeah. Well, it should not have, but unfortunately it does so often. Yeah.
And then there's another book, Yuval Levine. He wrote a book called The Great Debates. And so it really is, we want to be a nation that changes. We just want to measure that change, right? And so Democrats, he would argue, going back to Thomas Paine, he would say that they have been more revolutionary in nature. So throwing the baby out with the bathwater, just holistic change. If you see wrong, revolutionize the change. Whereas conservatives would point back to Edmund Burke. And Edmund Burke wasn't necessarily a revolutionary changer, but he was one that called for reform. Understanding there is a difference between the baby and the bathwater, keeping the good things, but then tweaking the bad things, because the bad things have stood the test of time. So there's a reason why they're there, and getting to the very root of that. So change isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is something that's necessary as we continue to create a more perfect union.
Gotta love a guy that knows who Yuval Levine is. As a matter of fact, we interviewed him on that very book on this program. So again, let's take some more phone calls, and we'll stay in Georgia for another minute, and we'll go to Jacob. What are your comments today, Jacob?
Yeah, Kerby, I'm very upset with the black clergy. And I recently read that 85% of them are preaching out against Trump and accepting Hillary as their answer to their prayer. And I'm upset because they don't realize that Hillary and Barack gives Planned Parenthood $500 million a year to kill black babies, specifically through the organization that specifically was set up to kill the blacks. And they are supporting them. Also, there is this black genocide that you and I have talked about before, and I wanted to come on your program and talk about the black genocide that I travel around the United States speaking out on, and that is African Americans, youth, boys are killing over 9,000 black youth.
Yeah.
Black people every year.
Both inside the womb and outside the womb. I mean, yeah, there is a precipitous decline in the percentage of African Americans compared to the rest of the population for that very reason. Yeah.
Right. And you know, it's time for people like T.D. Jakes and Creflo Dollar and all of these people to come out and deal with reality and speak out against these evils that is being perpetrated on, as they say, their own color.
Very good.
And I think this has to really become an urgent, serious issue with black and white clergies, that no longer will you try to bump elbows or agree with a culture because you don't want to have a conflict with that culture. I think all cultures have to speak out against that culture if that culture is doing things that are detrimental to their own survival and others who live in that world.
Well, I really appreciate your comment. I want to give you some more time, and maybe even the second hour could get back to it, but I don't want to take too much time away from Nick. But, you know, he lives in the state of Georgia right now, and they're saying that Hillary Clinton is ahead in Georgia. And if you go back and look at the numbers, Donald Trump's doing much better in the white vote. But, again, when you go to the black vote, 10-1, you know. So right now, African Americans say, no, we want Hillary Clinton, even though, as he points out, you look at where the abortion clinics are, you look at all the other issues that are related to that, some real concerns. You're from Tennessee, so I thought I would go to Tennessee and we might talk to somebody you know. So, Joe, thank you for calling today.
Thank you, Kerby, and let me just compliment you on this erudite and articulate guest you have today.
Maybe it's because you know him, right?
You know, I've known him since before birth.
Oh, no, he's got stories. He's got stories. We've got to watch out.
I'm not telling.
Well, again, it's great to hear from a family member, but I think you had an honest question there for your son. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did. And Nick has been in the meeting with Mr. Trump, and he's been in the convention with Mrs. Clinton, and I just wanted to ask him from a millennial generation standpoint, what is the one question the millennials wish that each candidate would answer truthfully or honestly that's very important to that generation?
That is a great question, Father.
You're still in the will.
Yeah. Oh, thank goodness. Okay. Yeah. I think, as personally for a millennial, I really do. I want to figure out what is the vision that you have for our country. Not necessarily what are the things that you're going to try to rectify the wrongs that have happened in the past, but really what is that 5 to 10 year vision? Cast a bigger picture for us. And so the founders casted a picture where people of all could come to our shores to be able to experience the freedom of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. JFK casted a big picture to send a man on the moon. We've every once in a while had a leader that has cast this huge vision and has asked all generations to come and to live in. And what I would love for in a leader is to be able to cast a big vision for all 78 million of we millennials to be able to come into and to contribute to be a part of that great society.
Yeah. And I'm afraid you don't have anyone there. You know, This is kind of like when, you were choosing up for volleyball or kickball and you got 2 kids left And both of you look and say, I don't care. I don't want either of them. And that's kind of where we find ourselves right
Kerby,
now.
you're talking about me when I was 7 years old. I was one of the last two that was picked.
Well, that's what we have right now with Hillary and Donald, and they're the ones that nobody wants. The other question I think millennials should honestly ask is, why is it neither the Republican nor the Democratic convention talked about a $20 trillion debt, that we have a president that basically doubled the national debt, that the debt from George Washington to the end of George W. Bush's term was doubled by this president, and what are you doing to us and our children and our grandchildren? I think that's a very good question that millennials should be asking, and 4 years ago at least, Paul Ryan was trying to address it. Nobody talked about it this time. Let's take a break. We'll get to some more phone calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and Nick Pitts is in studio with us today. He'll be leaving, but in the second hour, we'll still be taking phone calls, get into a couple of other issues as well that have been in the news. Of course, you've seen some of the questions about one of the individuals murdered in D.C., now saying that he was the source for WikiLeaks, and then you have Rachel Alexander writing about the Clinton body count, and then we'll get into some of the other controversial issues. So we've got a lot to cover, but let's take a few more phone calls before Nick heads back to his work there at the Denison Forum. And we'll go to Janet this time, listening on WLPT. Janet, thank you for calling today.
Thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to give my opinion on Donald Trump, it's got me so scared because I'm raising two of my grandchildren, and I used to think that there might be some hope. I'm not going to say that I don't think that there is anymore, but I found something on the internet the other day, and it said something about Donald Trump. I guess they said it turned out to be a hoax, but that he said that he wasn't really trying to make president, that anybody that voted for him was crazy, and that he'd been a lifelong Democrat and he was in Hillary's pocket. And then at the end of it, it said something like April Fools. And I can't remember like what news station, whether it was like CNN or Saturday Night Live.
Sounds like the Onion. But anyway, go ahead. So your point is?
Okay.
Yeah.
My point is this. It's, I've heard so many Christians call in and, say that they were going to support Donald Trump. And I'm not the smartest woman in the world and, the smartest Christian in the world. But I've always thought that the only way that we're going to be able to clear up this mess that our country is in is to select a conservative Christian. And they had some up there, in the primary, and, and they didn't get the votes. People were so mad at Barack Obama that they were, going to stock it to the Democrats by putting Donald Trump in there, and I just don't think that he can win.
Well, and you're not the only person that said something like that. And I've said before, Nick, I want to get your analysis since you're really a student of some of this. When you look at the evangelical vote, and I know the word evangelical doesn't mean a lot sometimes, but we'll use the terms everybody else should use. And you looked at the Iowa caucus, the evangelical vote allowed basically Ted Cruz to win. By the time you get to South Carolina, the evangelical vote went for Donald Trump. Now, what happened in between? And I suggest that a couple of things. First of all, you have Jerry Falwell Jr. endorsing him, and then you have an individual that's has sat in that very chair with you many times and with us before, Robert Jeffers, who didn't necessarily endorse him but came close enough to it. And it's sort of like some Christian leaders said, no, I think it's okay to support Donald Trump. And from that point on, he tended to win the evangelical vote. And so you now have a situation where you have some Christian leaders saying, I cannot in good conscience vote for Donald Trump, whether it's Max Lucado, Al Mohler. I went through the long list the other day. It's a pretty good list. But then you have others that are saying, well, he's not my first choice, but he's the only choice. So how do we think through this?
Yeah. And I would say you're bringing up great points in the sense that there has never been a perfect candidate that's run for office.
Yeah.
We've never had a perfect candidate to be able to vie for the presidency, but somehow in some way God has always called his particular person and God has led them. And so what I think is going to be so interesting is the amount of support that Donald has towards evangelicals. At this point in the presidential election from 2012 to 2016, Mitt Romney only had 73% of evangelical support, whereas Donald today has 78%.
Yeah.
So he has even more evangelical
Theoretically,
support.
if they go out and vote.
And so what I think you hit it right on the dot. You've just got these trusted leaders that have come and put their support behind this individual. Again, saying that we're not electing a pastor in chief, but we're really electing a commander in chief. But if we look at the biblical narrative, we have many that express hesitations toward that. Right?
Yeah.
We look and see character righteousness exalts a nation. And so many would say that Donald Trump's past doesn't necessarily coincide with righteousness, but that's neither here nor there. We can continue to see how God is going to use the person, whoever he deems fit, to be able to.
Well, it is interesting because you got Russell Moore, who's the head of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. You have Richard Land, who was in that same position before, and they're on different sides. And you have, as I said, Al Mohler, and on the other side you have James Robinson. And so it will be interesting to see how that plays out, because that list of those individuals that are now saying, whether in the political arena or in the religious arena, are saying they cannot vote for Donald Trump, if that list gets more and more significant and influential, then I can predict with virtual certainty that he will lose in November, right?
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I think disagreement is okay. Demonization is not.
Yeah. So again, just a couple more issues. Let's go to Bill. I think you had a little different perspective, and I wanted to give you that forum to express that as well. Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you for taking my call. I just want to ask the question, when does the Republican Party believe that the primaries will be over? We have a candidate. You don't hear the Democrats downgrading and demonizing their candidate. Why can't the Republicans understand that those that lost? the majority of the people picked Trump. Trump is our nominee. Support him. If there is an individual who is holding an office as a Republican, and I am terribly disappointed in Georgia. If you're holding an office as a Republican and you can't support the nominee, you don't need to be a Republican.
And I pointed this out the other day because I was in a meeting, Nick, where somebody was asking about, and this was a local one, this was just in Collin County, but still they were saying, what about these people that are Republican leaders that aren't supporting him? Shouldn't we kick them out of the party? And I thought the answer from the individual was very astute. He said, in the Republican Party, we believe in liberty. So these individuals, have a right to say that they're not going to support him. He says also have a right to ignore them. But he said, in the Democratic Party, it really is pretty much top down. I mean, right now, if you had, I mentioned the other day that Susan Collins, senator from Maine, has said she cannot vote for Donald Trump. But can you imagine if, let me take a more conservative senator, maybe Joe Manchin from West Virginia, saying I could not support Hillary Clinton? There would be a price to pay in the Democratic Party, because the idea is you follow suit or you pay a very heavy price, whereas in the Republican Party you don't really see that because there's a belief in liberty and kind of inclusiveness and even a big tent.
You're so right. I think what epitomizes kind of this resistance would be Ben Sasse. Ben Sasse has been a part of that.
Who's been on this program.
Never Trump movement.
What
and
a
I think
quality guy, too.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So Ben Sasse had a significant speech that he gave to CPAC, and Ben Sasse said he identifies himself at three particular tiers. On the first tier, he is an American. First and foremost, that he's going to pledge allegiance to the United States. The second is going to be conservative principles, that he is a conservative. And then the third being he's a Republican. And he's a Republican only insofar as it advances conservative principles. And what you find with many right now are that this is not the Republican Party that they knew.
Yeah.
It's kind of veered away from conservative principles. Therefore, the George Wills, the columnists, the esteemed conservative columnists, are leaving the party and cannot support the party nominee because they're not advancing the principles that they hold even higher.
Well said. Again, you are part of the Denison Forum, and if people wanted to receive that, they can go to the website. We have linked on the website there and get that in their inbox every morning, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. www.denisonforum.org. We would welcome your signing up.
And again, if you don't know how to spell that, we have the link on the website. We have a picture of Nick Pitts. And if you enjoyed the conversation, let me encourage you to download the podcast, maybe send it to someone, or go to our YouTube channel and send it on and learn a little bit more. Nick, I really appreciate you being in here. I hope this is not the last time. This is the first of many times we have you on the program.
Yes,
so
sir.
Thanks for joining us today.
Very much enjoyed myself.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue taking those phone calls. I've left the second hour as an open line, and I really want to hear from some of you. So those of you on the line, you'll get an opportunity to express your opinion. Let me just mention as well, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that August is a time when we certainly do need your financial support, perhaps more than at other times. So I've mentioned it before. Let me mention it again. You can go to our website, pointofview.net. Click on that donate button and also take advantage of all the great resources, commentaries, and videos we have there. It's available to you, and when you support us, you're supporting that. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
I had what many would call the Cadillac of insurance plans with my company. It covered everything, and that's what got us started thinking, well, what is everything? Are we indirectly paying for people to use services that we don't believe in or want to be a part of? And MediShare was the perfect answer for that.
I felt such relief switching over to MediShare. I wasn't paying for anything that I didn't believe in. I was actually able to stand up for what I believe in, and I was able to put my money where my faith is.
We're part of this great program, and it really costs us less than insurance.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 855-BIBLE-11. Not available in Montana. MediShare, affordable biblical health care. Call 855-BIBLE-11. That's 855-BIBLE-11.
Point of View Radio needs you in 2016. Join today at pointofview.net. Become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net. Or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Second hour today as we are continuing our conversation about the campaign. Nick Pitts was with us in the first hour, and again, Director of Cultural Engagement at the Denison Forum. He has left, and now we are going to have an open line this hour, as we are certainly going to continue that conversation, including his article on the meeting with Donald Trump and some of the questions that surfaced there. One that I've posted, which we have yet to talk about, by Victor Davis Hanson, on whether Donald Trump can win. He calls it Trump versus Trump. We'll get into that maybe in this hour if we have some time, but also want to deal with some of the breaking news that people have been talking about. Rachel Alexander has written about what's called the Clinton body count. We'll get into that in just a few minutes, but even more breaking is the story that is coming out from WikiLeaks saying that the individual, one of those individuals who was killed, a 27-year-old Democratic staffer, Seth Conrad Rich, was actually one of the informants for WikiLeaks. So that intensifies some of the concern. He was supposedly killed for a robbery, but the victim left his wallet, his watch, his phone. Looks like a hit more than a murder, a burglary gone bad or something of that nature. So anyway, we're going to get into some of those issues in just a minute, but we have some leftover phone calls from the first hour, so certainly want to hear your comments. And so we'll go to Rebecca in California, listening on KYCC. Rebecca, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, good. Thank you. Okay. So what I wanted to say was when Nick was talking about a vision in the last conversation, about how he was hoping that a leader would have a vision.
Sure.
I kind of feel like Donald Trump maybe has this, but he just hasn't said it in this way. But because I'm a millennial too, and what I would like to see is for our leader to give us, have a vision of our freedom back to worship God and just make that our theme, where we can be free to speak about Jesus again, and just really worship God, because I feel like if we can do that, we can bring our nation back, as much as possible. But I feel like if they take away our voice to praise and talk about Jesus, then they really are going to just get us, And also, last week a caller was saying, on Friday, he was saying, Donald Trump, I forgot how he worded it, but he said Donald Trump said that he felt like he didn't need forgiveness for anything. But, I wanted to say something on that, because sometimes my husband, he'll say, what do I need to apologize for? I did nothing wrong. But, we have to forgive them for that, because the Holy Spirit will convict their hearts. And Donald Trump, I believe that he really wants to get us back on the right track, evangelicals and Christians. And we need to support him, because I used to be anti-Trump, and it almost divided my family and me. But then I saw Ben Carson endorse him, and then I was moved, and I would need more leaders like that to stand up and support Donald Trump and to stand the gap for him, because we can really, in the spiritual battle, we can really get a good grip again, if more of our leaders would. And like Max Lucado, I think as Christians, we need to pray for him and other leaders who are kind of saying,
Yeah, well, and I understand, Max. I'm not sure saying he's not going to vote for Donald Trump, although it won't matter. He's in the state of Texas. Donald Trump will probably win Texas anyway. But, what kind of example is that from my girls? And I understand exactly why he's saying that, too. I mean, you want the long list of all the things Donald Trump has done that I have concerns about, or anybody else does? Yeah, we can make a long list in regard to that. But we'll see whether or not he says he's going to vote for him. But back to your first point, and I think it's a key one that we've talked about with Kelly Shackelford, and this week I know he's in Colorado, so he won't be with us on Friday, but I have one of his associates with us. The religious liberty issue, if that is your big issue, and it certainly sounds like it is for you, Rebecca, that's enough, because you can go to Hillary Clinton, who has made it very clear, both in her speeches and from those associates which we know she would put in government, that if there's any conflict at all between the LGBT agenda and religious liberty loses. And she has made that very clear. There's not a guess there. There's not an assumption. That is very clearly articulated. And you can find similar articulations in the Democratic platform, which, by the way, we're going to be putting well, first of all, we put it on the website, but we're also doing an analysis of it in our Outlook magazine. If you say, well, maybe we'll go to a libertarian. Well, the other day, interestingly enough, the libertarian candidate, Gary Johnson, said, well, black hole, religious liberty is a black hole for me. In other words, it's a nothing. It's not even worth talking about. So there's really only one candidate, either major candidate or third-party candidate, that talks about religious liberty. And Donald Trump right now is doing it in a way that is, quite frankly, surprising, because he is one, for example, that has said we need to repeal the 1954 amendment written and actually proposed by Lyndon Johnson that actually hamstrings and prevents pastors from addressing some of these political issues. I don't know of anybody, even conservative presidents, that have talked about that. And he's made that a very important issue, and those kind of planks ended up in the Republican platform. So if religious liberty is your issue, there's really only one person out there that is really talking about that and seems to be really serious about giving your religious liberty back. So, Rebecca, I appreciate you bringing that up today.
Yeah, thank you. That's huge. Okay.
Well, you go call in again. Let me see if we can get in just a few more calls before the next break. So we'll head to Jimmy in Georgia. Jimmy, what would you like to say today?
Good afternoon. I'm a Republican, and I'm supporting Trump. I'm a Christian, and I've listened to Nick's comments and such, and some of the callers. I think Trump is qualified, and what I've seen is and heard from the mainstream media is when he makes comments. Such as fully vetting people that come from areas of the world who are having conflicts, such as Syria and other countries, such as Iraq and Afghanistan. Those people need to be fully vetted before we say it's okay to come here. And we should have a refuge for people that need help. And America's always stood for that. But when he says vet those people, that's turned into something totally different by mainstream media and Democrats, of course, and I believe that's just one of the issues. I heard a caller say that they were afraid for the safety of their grandchildren if Trump were elected. I'd say the contrast is if Hillary's elected, we'll have more of the Obama administration diversity or division in our country. We don't need that. We do need law and order, and we do need God more than any candidate. Thank you for allowing me to express my opinion.
Well, appreciate it, Jimmy. We're going to take a break. And again, when you look at that refugee issue, his argument is, and I think it's a pretty powerful argument, if we don't know where these people are coming from, we don't know what's in their heart, and we don't have good documentation, maybe we need to pause instead of bringing them in and hoping for the best, because that hasn't worked out real well, and it's certainly not working out very well in Europe right now. Just ask the chancellor, for example, of Germany, Angela Merkel, or anybody else. Ask anybody right now in France or Belgium or the UK. Good arguments. Let's take a break. We'll take some more of your comments right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
This year, we'll be hearing quite a bit about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, also known as the TPP. It not only will be a part of the presidential campaign, but there's good reason to believe that it will be an important vote that will be taken after the November election. The TPP agreement establishes a Trans-Pacific Partnership Commission that has sweeping regulatory powers. It is charged with overseeing the implementation and operation of the agreement and has the power to amend it or modify it. In fact, the White House calls the TPP a living agreement that can be updated at any time. Curtis Ellis was on my radio program recently. He said that this commission is an international regulatory agency that will be staffed by faceless, unelected bureaucrats tasked with writing rules on immigration, food, energy, medicine, internet, copyright, patents, and business within our borders as well as across our borders. The TPP could be compared to the EU, which originally started out as a coal and steel cooperative, then evolved into the European Common Market, and now is the European Union. Months ago, the president made it clear that the U.S. wasn't interested in the UK if they left the EU because he wanted to negotiate with a big bloc like the EU. The U.S. Trade Representative reinforced those comments by saying that the administration only wanted to build trade platforms like the TPP. As Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton helped to negotiate the TPP, but then renounced it last fall, perhaps to fend off the challenge from Bernie Sanders. Some skeptics believe that it was merely a tactical feint and that she will push TPP through after the election. Donald Trump has consistently been against the TPP. The TPP is a bad trade deal, but that won't stop many in this administration that will push for a critical vote by the end of the year. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Betrayal, slavery, revenge, redemption. Ben-Hur in theaters August 19th from Paramount Pictures, rated PG-13.